Ottawa.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us here on election night on Rogers TV. I'm Mark Sutcliffe. It has been an interesting 5-week election campaign in Ottawa and across the country. And tonight, we will find out the results of that campaign. At least we hope we will. Who knows when the final votes will be counted. It's been an unusual election with thousands and thousands of mail-in ballots from Ottawa and right across the country. We'll find out who will represent you in the next Parliament of Canada. Will it be a majority government or a minority parliament? It appears as though it will be a Liberal government. That's what the major networks are already projecting this evening. We are going to talk about the local results in particular. And to help us do that, we are joined tonight by Caitlin Keeley, who is the CEO of Media Style, and Jennifer Madigan, the Vice President of Media Relations and Communications for Syntax Strategic. Welcome to both of you.
Hello. Hi, Mark.
Great to have you here. We are all in the same room tonight, but we are nicely distanced from each other, which is why we're each in our own little box here on your television screens. So, Caitlin, what do you expect tonight? We are seeing some numbers from across the country, and you see them on the bottom of your screen. The Liberals leading or elected in 139 ridings right now. The Conservatives in 96, that's up to 98 now. The Bloc Québécois in 30, the NDP in 21, the Green Party leading in 1, and no seats so far for the People's Party of Canada. I think the early indications seem to be that this is a little bit better for Justin Trudeau than maybe some Liberals feared. What do you think, Caitlin?
Well, given that it was the election that no one wanted and that we definitely didn't need, I mean, it's a bit early in the night to be making any calls, but I'm surprised that the Liberals are faring as well as they have, given that I think pretty much most people that I spoke to were not happy that we were going to an election during the pandemic, and a lot of people weren't really paying attention. I think voter turnout will be key in this, and I'm very curious to see sort of what the long tail results look like, but obviously it's already 10:30 at night and we're not even close to knowing when it happened, so we may be waiting a while.
That's true. And we may not know the final results. We may have a strong indication of where things are going, but we may not know the final results for a few days yet in some ridings if they are too close to call and the mail-in ballots come into play. But Jennifer, what are you observing so far, not just nationally, but locally? You can see on the left of your screen the local riding results. So far, no major surprises. You can see there the results in Kanata-Carleton. That's one of the ridings that people were saying would be interesting to watch. Jenna Sudds, the Ottawa City Councillor, is the Liberal candidate there and is leading so far. But Jennifer, what are you seeing?
Well, I'll be honest, I was hoping for a slightly more exciting night. I was hoping that things could be a bit different. You know, elections for the past many times have been sort of called very early in the night. I thought this might be a bit more of a nail biter, but we're not seeing that. As you said, there's no real surprises so far. I think, to Caitlin's point, what's going to be really interesting will be looking at things at the riding level or the seat level in the days to come. I don't think we're going to have any major change in the overall results. So I think the more interesting pieces will be known in the next few days, not tonight.
Yeah. All right. We are going to continue to report and analyze the results in Ottawa and across the country. For the next hour on Rogers TV, I want to bring on Ottawa Mayor Jim Watson, who is joining us by phone tonight to offer his thoughts on the election. Good evening.
Hi, Mark. How are you?
Good, thanks. How are you?
Great. Yeah, just glued to the TV and the Elections Canada website, refreshing it every 15 minutes to see the latest numbers.
Yeah, and this is past both our bedtimes, so we should acknowledge that. I appreciate you joining us this late.
It really is. I put off my ZQL tablet until after this interview.
All right, well, I appreciate that. Sometime we'll have to do an interview after you've taken it. But what do you make of the results so far? It seems like it is going to be a Liberal government. What would you say that means for Ottawa?
Well, we've had a really good relationship with Prime Minister Trudeau and his local MPs and ministers, particularly Catherine McKenna, as well as Mona Fortier in Cabinet and the other members of Parliament. We've gone to them with a series of requests supporting us in our fight against the pandemic and the extra costs that we've borne as a result of that, support for transit, affordable housing, public safety. And it looks like there's going to be, at least at this stage, no changes. The ridings, all 9 ridings that make up the city of Ottawa, are going to be represented, I believe, at this point by the same party. We're going to have at least 2 new people, and 2 people I'm very proud to call former colleagues. Jenna Sudds, as you pointed out, who was our deputy mayor and councillor for Canada North, as well as Yasser Nakfi. Looks like he's doing very well so far in the early stages, and Yasser was a great person to deliver things for the city when he was a minister in the provincial government. So obviously I'm biased, having served as a Liberal minister and an MPP, but I think we've been well served by these local MPs and candidates, and I think we'll continue to have a very positive relationship with them.
Can you talk a little more about Jenna Sudds? And she made a decision to run federally, even though she's still partway through her first term as an Ottawa City Councillor. There are always people who are going to question that when someone leaves one level of government and runs at another before their term is up. What kind of representative, though, do you think she'll be for Kanata Carleton if she is elected? It's still early yet, obviously.
Yeah, no question about that. And with all the mail-in ballots, you never know in a close race. It could switch around. But Jenna was very much a rising star when she ran in the last election. She formed the Kanata North BIA, which is the largest tech park in Canada, and did a very good job linking the tech community to the broader community. And she was chair of our Community and Protective Services Committee for a couple of years as well, and did a very good job there. And I think she'll be a great representative. She'll have to obviously burrow into West Carleton and Kanata North, or Kanata South rather, because she just represented Kanata North. But I think she put together a very good campaign. I think that riding was very fortunate. They had a couple of good, solid candidates, and the latest numbers show Jenna winning, but again, we don't want to prejudge these things, because this has been a bizarre election in terms of the number of people that, the lineups that were in Toronto, for instance, just getting into to vote was an hour and a half late, or an hour and a half wait. Excuse me, and you also had so many people wanting to mail in their ballots because of COVID, of course.
Yeah, and if Jenna Sudds, and again, I'm acknowledging that it's still early, and the results, we're looking at about 10% of the polls reporting, even though it's already been an hour since the polls have closed in most of these ridings. In some cases, you can see it's only about 4 or 5% of the polls reporting in Orleans. But if she is elected to Parliament, then there's just over a year to go until the next municipal election. I think that raises a question, obviously, of whether you'd have a by-election in her ward, or a city council would appoint somebody. Have you given any thought to that?
Yeah, those are really the 2 options, and both come with challenges. Obviously, you'd like to have the public to have their say, but then, of course, there's basically less than a year until you can start nominating, and the cost of a by-election, the clerk tells me, is about $700,000. So, I was mixed emotions when Jenna let me know she was thinking of seeking the nomination. Good for her. People want to see, good, ambitious people move up to another order of government. But sad that if she did win, that she would leave council, not so much because we'd have to have a by-election or appointment or so on, but because she was a very good, strong voice on a number of important issues the city was facing.
So I guess that decision will come later. So who do you expect to be, if indeed it is a Liberal government, and if all of the ridings, as the results are indicating, if they all kind of stay with the same party, who, in the absence of Catherine McKenna, who I think was as the most experienced cabinet minister and the highest ranking cabinet minister in the local Liberal caucus in the last Parliament, who do you think will replace her in that role? Who will be the go-to person for you and for the rest of the city?
Yeah, that's a good question, and only one person can tell you the real answer, and that's the Prime Minister. But I think there's a lot of good talent available. Of course, Mona is currently in cabinet. Mona Fortier and David McGuinty has a strong track record. Jenna would be certainly a new face, and Yasser has tremendous experience both in government and in the private sector. So hard to say, but obviously we would certainly like to get back to the rhythm of having two ministers representing Ottawa, because we are, as I mentioned, 9 ridings and we're the nation's capital. We had a very positive relationship. If you go back over the years, people like John Manley, who was the minister in the area, there was Muriel Boulanger and so on. So we had, strong local representatives, and some of them made it into cabinet or into other leadership roles. Remember, Marlene Catterall was the first female chief government whip. When she became the chief government whip as the MP for my riding here in Ottawa, West Nepean. So the Prime Minister will make that decision, and I'm sure there's lots of people lobbying for individuals, but I think we're very blessed to have some really strong, competent women and men who make up the government caucus. And then, of course, the other side of the river, I haven't followed those races very carefully, but, I've known Greg Fergus a long time. Greg's a great community leader in Hull, and you've got Stephen McKinnon and others that represent the Gatineau side, which is part of the National Capital Region.
So I have to ask you, there was obviously a very important Transit Commission meeting today that followed on another development with light rail, the derailing of one of the trains, and the light rail system is shut down for at least a few days, maybe longer. Give us the latest on that, and perhaps your own personal reaction as the mayor, as a proponent of light rail, and as someone who's expressed frustration in the past about the performance of the system. How are you feeling right now? Well,
obviously, very disappointed by the consortium and the fact that this has happened twice in a 6-week period. Their feet are going to be held to the fire. I'm going to be meeting with the heads of those organizations later this week. I think Councillor Alan Hubly did a very good job of stick handling a long transit meeting where there was a lot of detailed questions and a lot of anger expressed at what happened, and rightfully so. And Alan put forward a motion to have an independent review from a safety perspective, because we're not going to put the trains back on the tracks until we're 100% certain that safety is paramount. And of course, we're not going to be paying the consortium, because this is not the service we expect or that we paid for. I'm not the type that is going to sort of set my hair on fire and say cancel the contract and get a new company to come in and let's stop expanding light rail. I'm still a believer in light rail. We need it. We just need to make sure that we have a much better service than what RTG and RTM and Alstom and others have delivered over the last period of time.
Do you still have confidence in the system, and should members of the public have confidence in the system despite what's happened?
Short answer is yes, for the reason that we will have both our own independent safety check off on when it's safe to go back on, as well as the Transportation Safety Board, the TSB. I ride it fairly regularly, the LRT. I think it's a good, solid system. It has failed us too many times. We need reliability and dependability, and that's why I'll be meeting with the senior folks from those organizations to let them know that this kind of service is completely substandard, and it's not worthy of our city, our citizens, or their companies, quite frankly.
All right. Jim Watson, I appreciate you joining us tonight. Enjoy the rest of the election results for as long as you can hang in there without falling asleep. Appreciate it. Thanks for your time tonight. We'll talk again soon.
My pleasure. Take care. Bye-bye.
Ottawa Mayor Jim Watson joining us live tonight on Rogers TV. And again, just to bring you up to date on what's happening this evening, it appears we are headed to another Liberal government. It's not clear yet whether it'll be a majority government or a minority government situation. The Liberals are leading and elected right now in 146 ridings, the Conservatives in 118, the NDP in 26, the Bloc Québécois now in 28. The NDP have just gone up to 27. So it takes 170 seats to form a majority, so the Liberals are not there yet, but we'll continue to get results from across the country. The polls closed just over an hour ago in Ontario and Quebec, and about 45 minutes ago in British Columbia. Other parts of the country are, and let's face it, here in Ontario, there are ridings where there are still people voting, even though the polls technically closed at 9:30, because if you're lined up outside a polling station, they're still going to take you, even if the polls have closed. And that's what we saw in particular in some Toronto area ridings, and that was driven in part by the fact that there are fewer polling stations for a number of different reasons, sites not being available, it being harder to hire staff to run this election. So there you have it. That's where we stand at the moment. And in local ridings, you're seeing the results as they come in. Still early numbers, but at the moment, it appears as though the incumbents or the incumbent parties are hanging on to all of the seats in the Ottawa area. And Jenna Sudds, you can see there, has a lead of just over 148 votes with 20 polls reporting in Canada Carleton. That's one that we were told was going to be close. So, Caitlin Keeley, what do you think about the results? And there was a lot of talk about how this election might not lead to a big change in anything. And it looks like in Ottawa, it's not going to lead to a big change. There might be a couple of different people representing Ottawa ridings, but the party representation will be the same. And across the country, while there are a few seats changing hands, the numbers are stacking up very similar to 2019. Jim Watson talked about a by-election in Ottawa for municipally costing $700,000. This federal election, as Aaron O'Toole mentioned many, many times over the last few days, is going to cost $600 million or more. So what did this end up being about?
I was going to make the joke that it's very rare that Aaron O'Toole and I agree on things, but this one is definitely one. And again, as I started off, this is the election no one wanted and we didn't need, and look, we're 36 days in and ending up in the same place. I think BNN did a breakdown of how much the pencils cost. It was something ridiculous, like $1 million.
The free pencils.
$1 million worth of pencils has now been gifted to Canadians. So you got to vote and you got a free pencil. I think there are probably better ways to spend $600 million on a vanity project for the Trudeau government to try to get a majority. I know that's maybe not a popular opinion, but there's a lot of people hurting in the country. Specifically people of color and people that have, women have been pushed out of the workforce during COVID. And I just think that those dollars could have been spent so much better somewhere else.
Jennifer, do you think anything will change as a result of this election? I know that for a lot of people it was going to come down to exactly what the numbers were, and we don't know what that is. We don't know whether Justin Trudeau and the Liberals will have more seats or fewer seats after this election than they did coming into it, and that could be an important outcome, right?
Yeah, for sure. It'll be interesting to see where things land. I remember speaking with you before, when the election was called, and saying that, at the time, voters actually rarely punish their leaders for calling an election early. But I think in this case, not to the point the Conservatives would have liked, but I do think that this is definitely what we're seeing, is that people didn't want this election, but at the same time, I think on the other side, they didn't see enough of a reason to make a really big change to another party, despite the fact that the Conservatives really sort of shifted left to try to get some support there. So it doesn't look like anything will change dramatically, but it'll be really interesting to see what the parties do once these results are in, and what leaders stay and what leaders go, and who makes those decisions.
Yeah, and just on that, Jennifer, I think in the final days of this campaign, it was fair to say that there wasn't a single party leader who could be really secure in his or her future, because depending on what happened, there could have been a lot of pressure on Justin Trudeau, on Aaron O'Toole, on Jagmeet Singh, on Annamie Paul, maybe the exception being perhaps Yves-François Blanchet. But there were leaders' jobs at stake in this election, and maybe even tonight.
Oh, definitely. I think on the Conservative side, they're going to be questioning Aaron O'Toole's decision to make the choices he made in the platform, and also the reversals he made outside the platform. And there's going to be, they're going to be taking a hard look at that. Also taking a look at how the PPC vote went. I think that will have a factor in what's going to happen on the Conservative side of things. With the Liberal Party, Justin Trudeau took a gamble and he lost. But the question there is, would he ever step down if he's only able to secure another minority, or does the party push him out, or do things stay status quo? I don't know, but you're right. I don't think anyone other than on the Bloc Québécois side is safe after this.
Yeah, Caitlin, what do you think about this for Justin Trudeau? Because currently we're showing the Liberals leading or elected in 151 seats, which is maybe better than many Liberals feared a few days ago, 10 days ago, 3 weeks ago even. But it's still not a majority, and that was the purpose of calling this election, presumably. If Justin Trudeau's not able to show significant progress in this election, is this his last election as Liberal leader, do you think?
I mean, again, I'm sure that decision hasn't been made yet, but, I think he's probably, kicking himself for making that decision. But given that things are getting a little bit, what is it, sunny ways, a little more sunnier today, the Conservative strategists are already telling everybody that if O'Toole just keeps them to a minority, that was a win from a Conservative point of view. That seems like a very strange flag to wave when people are still voting. So, I think Trudeau can probably find a way to defend himself. He's gone through some major scandals and he's still standing, so another minority government's probably not going to knock him down, but he may choose to leave at some point for, spend time with his family. But I don't think that tonight's that night.
Yeah, I don't think it'll be tonight, but you just wonder if you win a majority the first time around, then you win a minority, then you win another minority, and you're not really attracting new voters, and certainly the numbers seem to suggest that he was the least popular of the federal leaders in this election. How do you grow from there? How do you attract more people to the party in the next election, right? I think that would be the challenge.
Yeah, and I think it was just a bad call to go during a pandemic. I really think that was his biggest mistake. He was very confident going in. He thought he had the numbers, and he obviously miscalculated what was going to happen in this election, because I don't think at any point was everybody like, yeah, that's a good idea. Let's have an election right now and go, stand in lines and share our cooties with other humans. I don't think that was a good idea. And I think, I also, again, I think voter turnout's going to tell us a bigger story at the end of today or tomorrow, once we sort of see, because there were a lot of unrepresented, like there was no student voting on campus, there were way less voting polling stations. I think that's really gonna hurt turnout, and I think it's gonna make it more inaccessible to a lot of people that might have otherwise voted.
So you're seeing the results on your screen as the numbers come in. On the left of your screen, you can see local riding results. So there's Jenna Sudds again, still 20 polls out of 238 reporting in Canada Carleton. So it's still very early, despite the fact that the polls have been closed now for almost an hour and a half. And when you see a check mark over somebody, that means they've basically been declared the winner. I think we're seeing some numbers that suggest that at the moment, it doesn't appear any riding is going to change hands locally. Yasser Naqvi appears to be on his way to election in Ottawa Centre, where Catherine McKenna represented the Liberals for almost 6 years. Let's look at the national numbers too. The Conservatives leading or elected in 122 ridings, the Liberals leading or elected in 151. It appears as though we are headed to a Liberal government. We don't know if they'll cross the threshold for a majority. Jennifer, let's look at the kind of closer to the bottom of the standings. I think it's interesting that we are showing the Green Party leading in 3 ridings, even though they only have 2.3% of the vote. The popular vote number is going to be disappointing, I think, for the Green Party, but if they end up hanging on to those 3 ridings in which they're leading right now, that would be a win of sorts, I would think, for them, even though it's not a big number. Meanwhile, you've got the People's Party of Canada, and we've determined that Maxime Bernier, the leader of that party, is not going to win his riding in Beauce in Quebec. And it doesn't look like they're going to win any other ridings in this country. So they've got twice the popular vote of the Green Party, but they could end up with 0 seats. It's kind of interesting.
I think those numbers are really interesting, and we talk about, let's say, vote efficiency, right? So having the votes where they matter. So the Green Party has more votes where it matters to them, and if they get 3 seats, that is definitely a win for them. But I do find the PPC number really interesting, and I think that's what we're going to be sort of breaking down in the coming days to see where were those votes and what did those votes do to different riding results, because I think that's going to be really interesting, and that's really going to determine what parties need to do moving forward to try to figure out, on the Conservative side in particular, you don't want that split vote, right? So I think we'll really be analyzing those numbers in the coming days.
Yeah, and do you think, Jennifer, that it is that simple, that 4.9% would have gone to the Conservatives, or is it more? I've heard a lot of people talking about how it's more complicated than that. And by the way, we're watching the popular vote too, because in the last election, the Conservatives won the popular vote, didn't win the most seats. So far, the Liberals are ahead in the popular vote, although the gap has been narrowing as we've moved west. So let's talk a little bit about that, about the popular vote.
Well, I think when you're looking at the PPC in particular, it might not just be Conservatives splitting off and it's all Conservatives voting PPC, but what it could be are the people leaving the Liberal Party who said, I can't vote Conservative and I'm going to go over here, right? That's where I think we really need to analyze it. But I mean, the people that I have spoken to, some people that I've spoken to that said they were going to support PPC were not people that I expected to vote PPC. So I think that will be really interesting to dig down and see where were those votes and get as much information as we can, and again see how that affected things at the riding by riding level.
Yeah. All right. Do we have Su Ling Ching, the president of the Ottawa Board of Trade? Is she able to join us? All right. We're going to go to Su Ling Ching, who is the president of the Ottawa Board of Trade, a local business organization that has been doing some great work bringing business issues to light, not just during this election campaign, but of course throughout the pandemic over the last 18 months. Hi, Su Ling.
Hi, Mark.
So tell me, I know you made it a priority. There's with a federal election campaign like this, so often the emphasis is on big national issues like healthcare, the pandemic, and so on, but you tried to bring into focus some important local issues. Just talk about what some of those were.
Well, a lot of the issues that we saw from the local business community were really aligned with the national priorities. And those things that we saw outlined by the Canadian Chamber and the Ontario Chamber in their platforms. So we saw a lot of emphasis on the environment and economic recovery from COVID-19, and affordability as a key issue as well. And then for businesses, making sure that we create a climate where the businesses can recover. So what is our response going to be to public health moving forward? And how are we going to build a strong foundation for the future?
How's the local business community doing, Su Ling, given everything that's happened in the last 18 months?
Well, just like it's been over the last 19 months or so, there are businesses who continue to do well and those who are suffering in a disproportionate way because of their sector or size of business. So I think the business community has really demonstrated a high level of resiliency and an ability to work together. And there's a sense of optimism, I think, overall. And there have been some mixed reviews, as you know, with some of the tools that we have employed in order to stay open and live with COVID moving forward.
Was there something in particular at stake, do you think, in this election for Ottawa and for the local business community?
I think that there was... We've had a lot of strong leadership in our candidates. We had the opportunity to meet with a few of them, and many of them had great ideas that were aligned with what our priorities were. So we've been fortunate in that way. So to see some strong leadership moving forward is really what we were looking for, and a commitment to continue to collaborate with the business community.
And given that it looks like we're not going to see a change in government, it appears it will once again be a Liberal government moving forward, and we're not going to see substantial change in local representation. There might be some new faces like Jenna Sudds and Yasser Naqvi, who are leading in their ridings at the moment. What do you make of all of that in terms of the opportunity for the city of Ottawa, for the business community in Ottawa to work with their local representatives?
I think it's an opportunity to continue the relationship that we've enjoyed. We have really collaborated at our local business community with that level of government more so over these last 19 months, I think, than we probably ever have. And so we're lucky that the new faces that we have coming in are experienced and have demonstrated a commitment to the business community and economic growth. So we're fortunate that way.
All right, Su-Ling, thanks so much for joining us tonight, and good luck to you and everyone else in the business community in the weeks ahead as we continue to recover from and emerge from the pandemic.
Thank you, Mark, and thanks for the great work you've been doing as well through the election.
That's Su-Ling Ching, who is the president of the Ottawa Board of Trade. Let's turn back to the election results. You're seeing numbers coming in from across our community. That riding in Kanata-Carleton continues to be very close, so I'll be interested. It's Jenna Sudds who's still leading there, but it is too close to call and declare her the winner at this point. So we'll continue to monitor that, but you can see in other ridings no change in terms of the party that is representing each of the 9 local ridings in Ontario. It doesn't appear there's a whole lot of change on the Gatineau side either. Across the country, we're seeing the Conservatives leading or elected in 121 ridings, the Liberals in 153. And Caitlin, we haven't talked a lot about the NDP so far tonight. Jagmeet Singh and the NDP are leading or elected in 30 ridings, which would be an increase in the number of seats. And in fact, based on the current numbers, the Bloc Québécois is leading or elected in 29, so that would put the NDP ahead. It's early, but that would put the NDP ahead of the Bloc, which they were not last time around. I would think that would be a win for Jagmeet Singh. And the other thing that would be interesting about that, Caitlin, is that if the Liberals end up somewhere around 150 and the NDP ends up at around 30, those two parties combined would have enough votes in the House of Commons to pass legislation, which would give Jagmeet Singh some power, wouldn't it?
130 would be a real good night for Jagmeet Singh. Yeah, I mean, anything where, you know, they get to hold the balance of power is probably good for, you know, the working people of Canada, because, you know, as the NDP talk about, you know, making lives easier for the like the middle class and for those that don't have as much as everybody else. So I think a good night for the NDP is a good night for everybody. I don't think it's going to go as far as they would like. We're not, you know, nowhere near the orange wave days of you know, a few years ago. But I think overall, they've run a pretty good election. I think they've got some good solutions. You know, I think we're going to be back to where we were. We were already in this position where Jagmeet was working with Trudeau. Jagmeet Singh was working with Justin Trudeau to push things through. So I think, you know, the more it changes, the more it stays the same.
Yeah, I just want to go back. If we have a chance to look at the numbers in Kanata-Carleton, let's bring those up again, because the gap is pretty narrow actually. Jenna Sudds is ahead and has been ahead as we've reported the results. And I'll point out the fact that often when the numbers are coming in over the course of an evening, you know, you can talk about there being this back and forth race, but this is just the order that the ballots are actually counted. There's not sort of this horse race going on live. It's just when the numbers actually come in. But look at the gap. It's only now 38 votes rather, between Jenna Sudds and Jennifer McAndrew, the Conservative candidate there. So it's still very, very close. That's pretty interesting, Jennifer.
Yeah, there was a bit of controversy, though, as you mentioned, with Jenna Sudds. she was a sitting city councillor, left that or took a leave of absence to run for this. She was acclaimed. There wasn't a process to choose her as the candidate there. So, not completely surprised that it's a tight race, and also that riding has a real mix. It has a lot of rural voters in there as well, which you could be seeing some of that in the close race here. So I don't know where that one's going to go. Yeah,
and it's hard to know, right? What numbers are coming in? We don't know if, as you point out, there's a mixture of rural and suburban in that riding, and so we don't know which polls are reporting. We only know that it's 30 out of 238. Mm-hmm. That's 15, not even 15%. So it's very early. The gap is narrow, but there could be numbers coming in from a very specific part of the city of the riding rather, and not from others. So we'll see how that goes. As of this moment, the Liberals are leading and elected in 154 ridings across the country. The threshold for a majority is 170. The Conservatives leading or elected in 122 right now. Caitlin, if that holds up, that's actually pretty close to where those two parties were coming into this election. What do you think that means for Erin O'Toole? What do you think that means for this next Parliament?
I feel like you just keep setting me up for we didn't need this election.
Yeah.
I just want to say one thing. I think the close races are going to be really interesting because, Elections Canada is saying that they're going to count special ballots tomorrow and Wednesday. So on things that are close, it could very well change tomorrow. So everything might be different, 20, 48 hours from now. If the Conservatives and Liberals are very close, again, we will be looking at a place where the balance of power is probably going to be held by either the Bloc or the NDP, and depending on the situation and the political moment, it will depend which way they need it to go and what deals they can make. But I think that ultimately we have a fairly broken system where, first past the post is not potentially a place where, the popular vote is actually represented in the seats that are elected. So it actually probably makes a better parliament because it forces parliamentarians to work together and to find common ground. And, politics are not black and white, so this gives us perhaps a good outcome.
Yeah. I'm doing live math here as I look at the numbers at the bottom of our screens, but I think we've got polls reporting now in 336 out of the 338 ridings across the country. So almost every riding in the country is reporting. We know that there are some ridings where the results are very early. So we sometimes, when only a handful of polls are reporting, it's not only too early to call, but it may be misleading that there's a party leading in a riding where they clearly are not going to win. So the numbers may not, accurately reflect where we're going to end up. But I do find it interesting that the Liberals are still at 155. And Jennifer, if the threshold's 170 for a majority, and we have results in from every riding in the country except for a couple now, it would take a big swing, and we'd need a swing to happen in 15, 16 different ridings for the Liberals to cross that threshold, right?
Yeah, it really doesn't look like that's going to happen at this point. And we're really obviously focusing on these numbers and what it's going to mean in the House of Commons, but I think the other thing that we need to look at is what happened during the election with people, with the protests that we're seeing and the anger that has come out during that election. That's something that these politicians are going to have to deal with. And how does a government that went into this election with 155 seats, I believe, if they come out with a very similar number, how are they going to address all of the anger that we've seen, maybe not start during the election, but escalate during the election?
Yeah, that's a good point. And Caitlin, maybe you can talk a little bit about that. Just before you do, I'll point out that the last time we saw numbers for Kanata Carleton, Jenna Sudds now has a lead of just over 200 votes, with more polls reporting there, so we'll keep an eye on that. I'll also point out that the popular vote across the country now, the Conservatives are in the lead, 33.8% to the Liberals at 33.5%. So that's interesting as well. And it's also very close to what a lot of the pollsters were predicting in the final couple of days of the campaign. But Caitlin, it looks like the People's Party is going to end up at about 5% of the popular vote, a lot higher than the Green Party, for example, but they're probably not going to get any seats. They have been relevant in this campaign. They've made some noise. There have been protests that have happened across the country, as Jennifer mentioned. Is that the beginning of something, do you think?
Well, I have deep-seated worries that it is the beginning of a much more divisive Canada, where it's now okay to be overtly racist versus quietly, politely Canadian and racist. I think we should all be very, very concerned about what's happened in this election when it comes to the PPC. I worry that we're giving them far too much airtime. I think that's only going to build their momentum. We've seen everything from rocks being thrown to events being shut down with violence, and it's not a good place for us to be, and it's going to shut down, it's sort of shutting down reasonable debate and replacing it with, Trump-style politics, and that's not what we want in Canada. At least we used to be politely rude. Now we're just being overtly awful, and it should be a concern to all Canadians, and a bit scary, honestly.
Jennifer, what do you think? Is this an outlet for a lot of frustration because of COVID and the restrictions and mandatory vaccines and that sort of thing? And when the pandemic's over, does some of the pressure come off, or is this the beginning of populist politics arriving on our shores? And I mean, I think there's another element to this question, and maybe it's a second question or it's related to this one, but there are going to be questions about the direction of the Conservative Party after this election, because Erin O'Toole took the party towards the center, trying to be more progressive. And there are going to be Conservatives who say that because he didn't win this election and didn't grow the number of seats significantly, that means it was a mistake and that the party should be more conservative. So there's all of that too.
Yeah, I absolutely think that's going to be an issue that Erin O'Toole is going to have to face, because he made a shift, and a lot of people that I've talked to over the course of the election have said, this is not the Conservative Party. They're not conservative anymore. This is not what I stand for. And so they're looking for another option. The thing that is so I've never seen before is the alternate reality that we're seeing throughout the pandemic, that we're seeing with PPC supporters in particular in many cases. And I don't feel like that's going to go away once the pandemic's gone. It just might be different issues that they're disagreeing on. And yeah, they're becoming more overt in the way that they express themselves. And it's been really fascinating during the election and scary to see in social media feeds, people that are just representing or stating claims that are so opposite from the view of the world that I have, that we seem to be living in alternate realities, and I don't know how you combat that. Yeah.
What about the future of the Conservative Party, Caitlin? Do you think there are going to be Conservatives, if they end up around 121 seats, which is where they are now in terms of leading and elected, are there going to be Conservatives who will say we need to go in a different direction from the one that Erin O'Toole chose in this election?
I mean, that's politics, isn't it? No one ever agrees. I mean, no party always pulls in the same way, and I don't think anybody thinks that that's the case. But I do think that, Erin O'Toole, from my point of view, tried to update the Conservative Party by adding climate change and things like that, that obviously in the last election a mere 2 years ago was obviously a gaping hole in their platform. So if they were trying to get the younger vote, I think that's a fairly good way to get at it. So it remains to be seen, but I think that it was basically an updating of their platform into a far more accessible, way to think about things.
Yeah, the interesting thing about that, though, I think is there's always this debate within the Conservative Party. Do you win by being more centrist, which some people would say is, copying the Liberals too much, or do you win by being more conservative, which some people say is risky and not where the country is, right? That's the debate that's always going on within the Conservatives.
Yeah, I thought to be honest, when that platform came out so early in the election, I thought that was a bit of a game changer. I thought he had a bit of a false start with that Willy Wonka ad at the very beginning. And when that came out, I thought, oh, this is not going to be a great campaign at all. And then they came out with this platform, and I thought, well, that's where they should have started, was with this. But it's interesting. It'd be interesting to see, how they're going to break down the reasons why he didn't get the support that they had hoped for. And you hope that they may not go too far away from issues like climate change and whatnot that are really important. But I think it's a matter of, are they looking at short-term polling, or are they looking at long-term, or they'll have to break down some of that support and see what they can do. But of course, that's what every party does, is gauge a lot of what they do just on how many votes they're going to get, right?
Yeah. So here's the interesting thing. At dissolution, the Liberals had 155 seats. They're leading or elected in 155 seats right now. The Conservatives at dissolution had 119. They're leading or elected now in 122. So that would be a gain of 3 for the Conservatives. It would be exactly the same result for the Liberals. The NDP are leading or elected in 29 ridings now. They had 24 seats. And the Green Party had 2, and they're at 2. So, it could not be closer to what we had before. This could end up being, Jennifer, an election that really, I know that some of the people will have changed. It's not exactly the same ridings that make up the 155 for the Liberals, but this could be the least amount of change in Canadian electoral history.
Yeah,
really.
And it's really unfortunate, because this is where people lose more faith in politics, right? When they see an election like this, where it was clear that it seemed very obvious that this was called with an attempt to have a change in Parliament, right? They said they needed this change in order to have support for what they're doing, and then nothing changes at all. I think the real loser here will be the voters as a whole. I think a lot of people will just, continue to lose faith in politicians and politics.
Yeah. So, Jennifer, do you think Aaron O'Toole's done enough to keep his job, or is that still kind of a big question mark in the next few days?
It's a good question, because within the party there are a lot of issues, that there's a lot of discontent. I'm sure there are many people who would say that he should lose his job, but this is also a minority parliament, or it will likely be a minority parliament, and so they also have to take a look at, how long is it going to last? How long will they leave a new leader? I guess often it's better to put someone new in early so they have time to build up their rapport with voters before the next election. But I think there's a lot for them to take into consideration once they see the numbers after tonight.
Caitlin, coming back to you on the same theme, would there be some sort of bizarre poetic justice to the Liberals ending up with exactly the same number of seats at the end of this election?
Yeah, and then we're going to be in exactly the same position in about 2 years, where we have another election. Maybe that time something will change, but I feel like we're just the Truman Show, where every day is the same day. Canadians didn't want this election, and they're telling us very clearly that no one's changed their mind, and that, go back to work and, keep making the country move forward. I think O'Toole's biggest mistake was to not, stand up against the pandemic, and the Liberals really took advantage of that. And I think the fear factor of Canadians of, what the Conservative government would have done if Aaron O'Toole was in charge, when he wouldn't even mandate that his candidates got vaccinated. And you're seeing the absolute destruction of Alberta right now. I think that's really probably struck some fear into voters that might have been willing to take a chance. But it was poorly timed for Aaron O'Toole, and I think Jason Kenney and some of the blame can fall fully at their feet.
Yeah. Let's talk about the numbers a little bit, because we'd have to go back to 2019 and take a look, but I think it's going to end up very close in the popular vote, because we've got the Conservatives basically at 34%, the Liberals at 33%, give or take, and Jennifer, I'm pretty sure that's about where they ended up last time around. It's also, that suggests to me a lot of fragmentation in Canadian politics. This will be 2 elections in a row where 1/3 of the country voted for neither the Conservatives or the Liberals, and also 2 elections in a row where 2/3 of Canadians didn't vote for the party that ended up forming a government, right?
Yeah, it's true. And there's been so much talk about changing the way that we bring in our governments. I don't think that's ever going to happen, to be honest, or not in the near future. But I mean, even when you look at that, the popular vote, and then we're looking at the seats, you're still set with then not having a majority. You have no one with that clear force of power. So I think in a way it's sort of balances itself out there. It doesn't help us. It doesn't help the government move things forward at all. But the fact that the Liberals don't have the lead in the popular vote, and they don't have the seats, so that's a reality that they're going to have to deal with, and they'll have to work with those other parties to make some decisions.
So the popular vote in the last election, the Conservatives had 34.3%. They're at 34% right now. And the Liberals had 33.1%. They're at 32.8%. So there's a drop at the moment for the Liberals. The NDP, by the way, were at basically 16% last time around. They're at 16.7 in this election. So they've gone up by almost a percentage point, 3/4 of a percentage point. The big change, of course, is the Green Party that's gone from 6.5% down to 2.1% as of now. Caitlin, one of the other things that I think will be interesting at the end of all of this is the voter turnout, right? And I think it's going to be difficult to interpret the voter turnout because this election's happening during a pandemic. We know that there will have been people who will have felt uncomfortable going to polling stations. I know everybody could vote by mail. That doesn't mean everyone who felt uncomfortable will have done that. There may have been people who showed up at polling stations today, saw long lineups, and went home. So sometimes we interpret low voter turnout as either apathy or frustration or disenfranchisement, but it'll be hard to know what it might mean if that's the case in this election, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be a mix of all of the things that you've just outlined. The pandemic's going to keep people home. 3 hour, I think in Toronto they were reporting 3 hour wait times for voting. Like, I'm a very nerdy, engaged Democratic person, and I was thinking on the way here, like, would I stand in line for 3 hours to cast a vote? Probably depends if it's nice out. Did I have coffee? Like there's it's just unacceptable, and I worry that people turned around and walked away. I mean, we don't have great voter turnout in this country at the best of times. I think 65, 68%. Like, it's not it's not a really high number when things are normal. So you put a pandemic in there, and I think you're going to see some pretty bad turnout. And again, there's no on-campus voting for students. There's less polling stations. There's so many reasons that these numbers are probably going to be affected in addition to pandemic.
Yeah. All right, the big local story is simply that every riding in our area at the moment appears to be the same color as it was coming into the election. All of the incumbents appear to have been re-elected, and Yasser Naqvi has been elected in Ottawa Centre, the riding that was held by the Liberals under Catherine McKenna for the last nearly 6 years, since 2015, when she defeated Paul Dewar, who held the riding for the NDP. Jenna Sudds is leading, as you can see, by 501 votes, with about a third of the polls reporting now in Kanata Carleton. That's the closest local race in Eastern Ontario. Jenna Sudds, the Ottawa City Councillor, who is running for federal politics, replacing Karen McCrimmon, who chose not to run again. She would have been the Liberal incumbent if she had run again. So it's a Liberal riding that appears to be on the way to staying Liberal, but it is too early to declare Jenna Sudds the winner there. Jennifer, let's talk a little bit about Jenna Sudds. I think she was widely regarded as a strong voice on City Council. She was also quite accomplished before she went into politics, as Jim Watson mentioned earlier, having served as really the founding leader of the Canada BIA, the Canada North BIA, which is a really strong business group. So if she is elected, it'll be interesting to see what role she plays on behalf of our community.
Absolutely, and it's interesting, that could be a case where the candidate really mattered just as much or more so than the party, because she does have a great track record in the area through all of that experience that you mentioned. So I think when you look at Jenna and you look at Yasser Naqvi, we've got some great voices if this is what we see at the end of the night. I mean, it's good news for the city. We'll have some great voices in government that can speak for the city. So even though it hasn't been a dramatic change, that's what Ottawa does, right? Ottawa generally mirrors what goes on in the rest of the country, and that's what we're seeing again tonight. But overall, I think it'll be good for the city because we'll have some really strong representatives in the House of Commons.
Caitlin, do you think Yasser Naqvi is headed to cabinet? He, of course, was the Attorney General in the Ontario government.
I mean, he definitely has the credentials to take a cabinet position. I mean, it'll again depend on who else gets elected and what Justin Trudeau is looking to do if that's where we end up. But yeah, I think you're right. It's good to have big names with great backgrounds. There are a lot of very solid candidates that are not going to win tonight that also could have formed some pretty good cabinet positions, but yeah, I think overall Ottawa's looking pretty strong.
Yeah. Jennifer, do you the big issue of course is light rail, and not just the issues that have come up recently with the derailments and so on, but the future of light rail, bringing it out to Canada in phase 3, that sort of thing. Are there any other local issues that you think this newly re-elected Liberal government will be called upon to act on in the months and years ahead? I
mean, yeah, you're right. Light rail will be number one, and beyond that, I think. I mean, right now it's hard to look past the pandemic recovery. Yeah. So really looking at what measures will be in place to help businesses that are struggling right now to find people to work, businesses that are struggling because of the effects of the pandemic. We're definitely seeing that in Ottawa. And we have a really strong tech sector growing in the city, so an opportunity for that recovery to be fueled by that. So maybe looking for some support on that side.
Yeah, as more and more numbers come in, we're not seeing a significant change in the results. So it looks as though locally every riding is going to stay the same color. So whoever you were represented by in the previous parliament, you will be represented by again in this parliament. The exceptions being that Yasser Naqvi is going to be the MP for Ottawa Centre, replacing Catherine McKenna, but both Liberals, and it appears Jenna Sudds is on her way to a win in Kanata-Carleton, although it's too early to declare. And across the country, you can see the numbers. The Liberals leading or elected in 156 ridings, very close to what they had coming into this election. The Conservatives in 122, the NDP in 29, the Bloc Québécois in 29, and the Green Party leading in 2 ridings. So a parliament that will look very similar to the one that we have just been served by. And Caitlin, any final thoughts? Anything else that you're going to be watching in the days ahead?
Well, I'm hoping to see my pillow soon. No, I think the special ballots, it's going to be really interesting to see where those make a difference, or if they just repeat what we've already been seeing all evening. And I think, again, the voter turnout, I'm just super fascinated to see if the less number of polling stations actually has a crushing result on how many people got out to vote today.
Yeah, you can just see the news there that Annamie Paul has lost to the Liberal incumbent Marcy Ian in Toronto Centre. So Annamie Paul will not be in the House of Commons. That'll be an interesting storyline. The Green Party is leading in a couple of ridings, but not the one where their leader was running. So there, of course, had been all kinds of issues about the Green Party and internal fights. So we'll see where that goes in the days ahead. Lots to watch in the next few days and weeks, but a parliament that's going to look a lot like the last one. Jennifer, Caitlin, thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And there you have it, the local results from our election campaign. I'm Mark Sutcliffe. Thank you for watching.